immense amount of rains. You mentioned in the previous episode that you had, I don't know, what was it, like a meter a month or something like that last year? Crazy amounts, but you're dealing with water on your own farm in your own way right now. What's the state of things as it comes to getting water off the farm because you have so much?
So we've altered our landscape a little bit just to let the excess out. We did that years ago. Prior to that, I've got photos of my 4-year-old with a snorkel and flippers in like a lake. And if it can't get out and it's sitting, that's when you're in trouble, regardless of your total rainfall for the year. So it's tough looking at sitting water, and that's kind of where we started. We didn't have to make a lot of alteration to let that water out, but imagine your 4-year-old in a water arena, just thinking it's super fun, but you're actually like, mate,
Right.
we're going under.
Is it still a problem now, even with the work that you've done? It seems like you've gotten a lot of rain over the past year. You've added greenhouses that obviously protects what's inside, but is water a problem with, because again, just for people who haven't maybe listened to the whole series, an average month, how much rain are you getting?
On a wet month, 500 mils, half a meter.
So half a meter, half a meter.
Half a meter. That's a very wet month, but on average, 300 mils, like that's normal. So we can have 300 mils 9 months of the year, and it can be any month. It can be
Like,
peaks. It can
it's
be
like 10
peak summer.
inches. Yeah, it's like 10
Yeah.
inches. That's quite a bit. Does that pose a problem?
If it can't get out, it poses a problem. And this is our last podcast, we looked at Tough 23. I've seen more farms underwater in the last 2 years than ever. The weather's, unsettled, we'll say it that way. Yeah, it poses big problems if it can't get out. And I think I'd like to start with this one, Diego. If you're looking at a site to purchase, you want to look at your total catchment area. Like, you might just have a small bit of land, but the lay of the land, that your total catchment could potentially be huge, which means all of that water, if you're the low point, is going to come to you. So the catchment, you might only have 4 inches of rain or something, but your total catchment could be massive. It could be, acres and acres and acres. That's all going to head your way. So it's it might sound left field, but we have a shared right of way next to us. And for our part of it, when the time that I work on that is in the torrential rain, I'm in my gumboots and rain jacket. That's when the water's running. That's the time to work on it and see what's happening. And my neighbors drive past, they half wind down the window and they go, "You crazy?" And I'm like, "Mate, this is the time to be doing the work."
Yeah, because that's one thing that if you're not careful on your water management, and we can definitely talk about this in a future episode, all the work that you do building beds, all the work that you do building fertility, the money that you spend can literally get washed away. So dealing with rain, dealing with excess water at the catchment point is huge for maybe people who aren't getting that. Is if you're at the bottom of a slope, if there's a bunch of land above you, even if you don't own it, gravity is going to force water to go down. Is that if that water is being directed onto your property, you in effect have this amplifying effect on the volume of water that you have coming in, which can be a huge advantage for people who want to fill a pond or dump it into some sort of major swale higher up or do something like that. But if you're not prepared for it, that's, one of those Mark Shepard things where it's, your beds go visit the neighbors.
Yeah, adios to your topsoil and your mulch paths. So check out the work of Regenerative, Darren Doherty, and if you've got a site and you want to build a pond and a dam, super efficient service there. You're paying for the experience, right down to how much soil you're going to need to move, what type of soil you have, and I mean, we would love to have a dam or a large pond on our farm, kind of tight for flat land. And I mean, and you can make a water feature super fun. Darren's farm which I visited in Australia years back. It was a keyline demonstration site. He'd made a big dam. I think it's 1,000 liters, which is a mega liter, and you can just about jet ski on that, and what the water's all arriving to it, and on the berm, or the kind of the bank that he built where the water doesn't enter, so the opposite side, they got a truck and trailer unit of white sand and put down some ready lawn and made a beach. And it was a super cool hangout space, like hot summer. It was like so much fun. They've got a slip and slide into the water, loud music, chill out space. You can, when it's hot, it's nice to have water around as well.
Yeah, really cool. And just something to think about from a resiliency standpoint. I know a lot of the shows I do around farming are definitely geared towards, you do this as a career, it's a livelihood. But a lot of people do look at this through a little bit of a resiliency preparedness mindset. So you have your own property. Water is a scarce resource. And in many areas like we have in California, maybe not so much for somebody like you, but nonetheless, management's important. Moving on, there's that Darren Doherty saying of, you need to be blue before you're green, I believe is the saying he uses. You got to have water before you have plants. Well, you have water, and you've utilized a lot of that water over the past year to grow cover crops. And in the past episode, you talked about putting your production beds to sleep, given the slowdown in the market. Can you talk about what that means, putting beds to sleep?
So we're pretty much putting cover crops in just to keep plants functioning, pumping photosynthesis, root exudates into the soil, and it's a super quick strategy to not have to do too much with that area. So you kind of nailed it, putting an area to sleep. I'm going back way back, nearly 20 years ago. When we were doing seed production in summer, so we have a long vegetable seed production, we have a long seed crop in for summer, and then we'd put the whole garden to sleep into cover crops for winter, and it would be a mixed species, a long season mix of cover crops. So it would be grains, pulses, legumes, anything, 10, 15 varieties in there together, mostly annuals, so we can terminate it. But we would, oats was a key component. So we'd be seeding all of that in autumn and fall. And with the John Jevons kind of mindset, we were waiting till the plants had grown to full maturity to get the carbon to be able to harvest for the compost. That's pretty old school. And, we would have the whole garden in cover crops in winter. Moving forward, and actually, I'd like to just stick with that one. So all I had was a rake and a little 5-tine fork. So I'd do my bed prep, and to create a beautiful seed bed, conditions for germination, I would rake the surface pretty physical to get a beautiful seed bed, and then broadcast or scatter sow the mixed seed on top, and then rake really aggressively to bury the seeds, irrigate, cover with shade net. And it's still not a lot of work, but it's pretty physical on the rake. That's kind of how we started out before we knew about things like Tarping and Tilther and, all the new tools that really make the farmer's life a bit easier. And then the catch-22 with this one, though, is to get the carbon, you need to steal half of your spring grow out time for these plants to mature. And when they're finished, the plants are standing and brown, it's easy to get them out. But if they're still alive and green, and you want to manually pull them out, well, there's not enough hours in the day. So we used to grow those cover crops for the soil, but also for compost production.
Yeah, if you look at back then, how much do you think that helped build your soils? Was that, an invaluable part of the process?
I think, back then we had young children. I was working off farm. It was I guess the thing here for anyone at any time is something happens, you can put the garden to sleep pretty quick and forget about it. So that was the value. I could be traveling, or I could be at work off farm, knowing I don't have bare soil. The garden's looking after itself for now. And I think in terms of plants doing the work, to aerate your soil, it's context. It depends what you're on. We're on a really hard pan mountain ash subsoil. So my strategy here is, ideally I like to open the soil first before putting the cover crops in. And so just to stick with that moving forward, as we develop a new field block, we're just cultivating the top 3 to 4 inch to break up the grass crown, and it's compact underneath. Then we can tarp it, kind of kill out the grass crown, and then we can tilther the surface and be straight in with cover cropping. So that's a pretty quick way to hit a big area. Just as long as you've killed the grass out using the tarp process, you can get quite an area cover cropped, knowing we can develop this in the future when we have the time, the labor, and the need for the markets, the sales.
When you look at putting a bed to sleep for, whatever reason, hey, life comes up, like you said, kids or something, traveling, you got to step away. Maybe it's market driven. We're not as busy. Maybe it's you were just too aggressive. Hey, we added all these field blocks. We're not ready for them yet. There's numerous tools you can use. You can use biological tools to, quote, put them to sleep, cover crops, which there's, all the US NRCS benefits, living root in the soil, continuous cover, all those are the primary benefits there. You could also tarp them, where you just pull a piece of plastic over, you provide that manual cover using a man-made. When you look at the pros and cons of each, obviously you're not going to get root exudates and soil plant interaction with a tarp. But if you look at, the labor, the cost, the maintenance, if somebody's looking at, do I cover crop, do I tarp? How do you view those two in your head?
Nice question. My response to that is always, what are your goals? Like, when do you need to be selling from that area? That's usually my first go-to point. How much labor do you have? And, tarping really works better in summer. In winter, we're using the tarp process as a raincoat. I guess, when do you need to be in production in that area is the first kind of driving question. And then there's so many different ways that you can hit it. These days, we're generally... Sorry.
No, that's a good point, right? Because if it's just tarped, you can always pull the tarp off and get plant and you're ready to go. Where if you have a cover crop, is that a day at least, you think, if you had a bed and cover crops and you get a big order in that you weren't expecting, but it's good, you're not going to turn it away. Is it a day to, turn that bed over, assuming you're not just rototilling it in or something like that? Or are you talking like weeks? How would you view that?
It's quicker in summer because, biology's awake. It's a lot. Takes forever in winter. Ideally, your new client hits you up late winter, so you can early spring, so you have a lead in. So we're just terminating cover crops at the moment, and they're at full flower. These crops are buckwheat, and I've got a 3. It's basically a blade. It's got 3 sharp sides on my line trimmer weed eater, and I can just it's basically a petrol powered scythe, and I can cut down the cover crop at the ground level just in seconds, push it all to the side in a windrow, and we're just collecting that for the compost. and kind of that's the way John Jevons has always approached things. Put your biomass in the compost. That leaves obviously all the root systems in, which are down deep, but the struggle for flipping the bed to get those veggies in for your new order that's come in is if the crops that you need to be direct seeding, very difficult to run the seeder through it. So we've just terminated some buckwheat, just smashed it off at ground level. It's gone into the compost, and we're getting some pretty nice yields off it. And we're wanting to get another quick cover crop in. So I've just used the Tilther with the big Makita drill on the number 2 on the drill. So it's like a full power setting. And we're running over the surface of the root crown, and then using a single Jang, which has a bigger furrow, you can push it harder, and we're going in 7 rows of daikon. So we just flipped beds yesterday. Basically, as soon as the daikon's out, we're smashing, the buckwheat's out, we're smashing in daikon, another quick cover crop. I guess in terms of termination too, it also depends on the stage of the plants when you're terminating it. So, the stems have just hardened at the base of the buckwheat, which means there's a lot more root crown at the surface. So you can flip a bed quick and push the Jang in to get another cover crop in, but there's no way the 5-row Jang or the 6-row seed is going to drill a salad for you in those conditions.
How would you feel about doing that same process where you string trim, you clear the bed manually of the top debris, you leave the root crown in, and you just hand transplanted into it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you could transplant, let's say, lettuce into that immediately. The soil's still going to be bound at the surface. If the cover crop is really high density, we'll come back to our seeding rates, but we're drilling our cover crops at a very high rate. Transplant's pretty much your only way in.
Okay.
I know there's a disc for the Jang, but really you want uninterrupted. The furrow to open and close the soil needs to be uninterrupted to get, to be direct seeding in there for sure. So that's why we've chosen the single Jang for going back to back with our cover crops. The other option is it's been super hot. It's summer. We just remove everything at the surface, make compost, and drop a tarp on it and keep going doing something else on the farm.
How long would you leave it tarped in your conditions in the summer?
We've just been having some nice, probably one of our hottest summers. We're sitting at 26 Celsius with high humidity, fast burn time on your skin. 3 weeks, something like that.
In 3 weeks, you could then run a JP5 in to direct seed. There's enough of that.
Yeah, and
it's broken up.
Yeah, and kind of my feedback loop with running the 6-row or the JP5, because the JP5 will just push soil if it's too wet, too much root material, it just won't push through. So maybe you just power harrow the surface twice, or tilter the surface twice, and then just do a check, like a dry run, no seeds in the seeder, and see if it'll run. Because if it's really going to start every 3 feet, it's difficult.
I think I love that tip there of just don't put seed in the seeder, try pushing it dry, see what you get, and then there's no point in putting seed in, because if it doesn't work, now you got maybe a little part seeded and you got seed spilling or whatever. So yeah, I like that tip. So your process is basically this to terminate a cover crop right now. If you're harvesting the top for biomass, when it comes time, you let it go fully to flower because you don't want it to start setting seed. You string trim it down. You take that biomass, you remove it, the upper above surface biomass, remove that from the bed. That goes in your compost to be used in other places of the farm later. And then you would either direct seed back into it if you could with the single row Jang, or tarp it with a tarp in the warmer parts of the year, let it sit for 3 weeks, and then you can really go do whatever you wanted in terms of planting into it.
Yep. And I guess the other option, if you're, and let me know if you're this person, if you've got surplus compost that you've made yourself, you could you could just be putting a larger amount of compost straight on top to be able to seed into that. The challenge there, if you're making yourself, is having enough.
Have you ever tried, I mean, coming out of the John Jevons school, crimping? People use the board with a kind of a rope on it. I know they have good luck with it. What are your thoughts on those types of methods where you're just breaking the stem, knocking it over versus cutting it with a line trimmer?
Yeah, I love it. I guess, we're very small scale. We're generally trying to flip beds as many times a year as possible. And currently, with the economy down, we are doing a lot of cover cropping. So I'm still trying to get back-to-back quick cover crops in. I love the crimping. And I've been watching the work at Frith Farm. I think they have a song as they're knocking down the rye, crimp the rye, don't hurt the thigh, crimp it. And it's beautiful. We have to do that at the hottest part of the year because otherwise nothing will break down under the tarp. We just don't have the heat units. Let's say it's autumn, we're too late. If you're doing like transplanted field squash and stuff like that, very nice way to just knock it down, crimp it, use some heat briefly, and then transplant straight into it. We're tending to, so we're making all our compost on the farm, and we're tending to take the above biomass to compost to be able to return that to the bed. So we're just going nuts on compost this year with the cover crops that we're making. So I guess it's about what your goals are, but like yesterday we had buckwheat out, compost made, daikon in on those same beds all in the same afternoon.
Yeah, the leaving the biomass on top of the surface is I think that comes down to a lot, like you said, to climate. The warmer it is, the quicker you can get rid of that by putting a tarp over. Now, I would maybe debate people of how much of that biomass you leave on the surface makes its way to the soil, because I think a lot of that is going up in CO2 and carbon monoxide and methane. So I don't know about just leaving it there and letting it break down under a tarp. It's not like all that biomass magically turns into humus in the soil. You're losing quite a bit of that to the atmosphere. Not really a market garden fit, maybe going more into the garden or bio-intensive realm. You could potentially leave that biomass on surface, transplant into it, and use it as a mulch. I don't necessarily see that working in a production scenario. I mean, give me your thoughts on that.
Well, I think Frith Farm are making that work really well. John Jevons, I mean, everyone's got their own style, but his thinking is if we remove the biomass, we can, how do I say, decompose that, stabilize it as humus, and return it. And John's thinking is that maybe it's in his climate, but he's getting more humus back to the soil with that process. I guess you can get another crop in slightly quicker. Crimping and briefly tarping with the heat. If you're mulching, it makes sense to crimp it, briefly cook it, just so it's terminated, but you've still got all the biomass there. If you're going to bring in mulch from outside, potentially bringing in problems like weed seed, glyphosate, whatever, it's a beautiful thing just to crimp down a cover crop, tarp it for a week with the heat, and transplant straight into it. Living mulch in situ, no wheelbarrowing stuff. A lot of people are putting compost on top of that too. Our style, we really like to incorporate the compost into that top 2 inch, and we do a lot of direct seeding. So we're always trying to get the drill back in the 5-row or the 6-row as soon as we can.
Yeah, I think you could maybe argue. I mean, this is getting really in the weeds, but the best place to affect a seed in its growth stage is in the seedling phase. So when you plant it, if you can give it the most supreme soil as you plant it, that arguably has a better effect on the life of that plant than it would in the field. So if you only have so much resources to go around, you're better investing that resource in a potting mix to get a really high quality seedling that can then go out into the field versus going the other way, skimping on the potting mix, having a struggling seedling that goes into a magical field. Maybe?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, what's the tree planting saying? You want to put a $2 tree in a $20 hole, not a $20 tree in a $2 hole.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, so cover crops, a lot of great tools now to manage it. That's the thing with all modern tech now, between the tilther that Johnny sells, string trimmers, size, tarps, silage tarp, landscape, whatever you're going to use. A lot of this is easily accessible. So I think the tools and equipment to make cover cropping a reality on farms is no longer an excuse. It just comes down to things like time. Like, can you occupy those beds with a cover crop for that time, or do you need to be in production? When you think, if we kind of circle back 10, 15 minutes, tarp versus cover crop, so you have planting day to put the cover crop in, relatively quick. Prep the bed, seed it. Between seeding it and terminating it, there's no maintenance, right? I mean, or relatively none.
We're drilling or seeding at super high density, so no, it's nothing. Just the only maintenance is keeping the irrigation up at the early stages, prior to getting your living ground cover. And for us, that's just sumi soaker. It's just click, turn on, and 8 beds are watered. So we tend to do our cover crops in blocks. We've done multi-species mixed cover crops for years. At the moment, we're tending to do less variety, just annuals that will all, we can terminate at the same time. And at the moment, we're just doing single cover crops. Buckwheat. Buckwheat's beautiful, super fast germination, tolerates low rainfall. The flowers, long flowering window brings in the predator insects. And what is it? It concentrates phosphorus, puts a ton of root material in faster. We love the fast cover crops. We prior podcast pea shoots, we're doing them as a cover crop as well. Obviously not the whole farm like that. So yeah, we're generally focused on quick cover crops these days, and that could all change. We're developing the room for a new greenhouse, but we're adding to the other greenhouse, but we can't grow in there until the build's complete. So we're just going to cultivate the surface and put that into oats for winter. And what other crops? Oh, I guess we're going back. As we develop field crops, we would just cultivate the surface, and we were putting like 13, 15 varieties in there. It's beautiful, but when we went to terminate the annuals, the perennials were just getting established underneath. So I'm not saying there's a right or wrong, but we've kind of dropped the perennials. We had lucerne, alfalfa, what's the other one? Clovers in underneath, and we're noticing that they didn't want to get established until we took the annual cover crop off the top. And we were kind of in a situation like, hey, we want to terminate now, and the perennials just want to get established. So we're sticking with annuals, similar time frame. Obviously, more variety in there is a better thing. And yeah, I guess I'd like to just talk about a few other ways that we've been getting the cover crops established.
Well, before hitting that, one thing there regarding terminating, I like the point of going with annuals to ease in termination, because I think that is a worry why people don't take them on, is like, how am I going to terminate this? Like many things, if you don't do it a lot, if you haven't done it a lot, you can tend to build up this large amount of worry in your head and be really adverse to something. And then you actually go and do it, and you're like, oh, that wasn't that bad at all.
Yeah.
When you look at terminating cover crops, is there really should people really worry that much about dealing with termination if you pick annuals, or is it's just another thing you do on the farm? It's not that bad. It's totally manageable, and just if you're worried about that, stop worrying about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same, it's across the board mindset is generally we have more compaction in our mindset than in our soils. uh yeah, just hit it. Just do it. The blade on the line trimmer means you can terminate super quick, super fast. It's at the ground. It places everything to the side on the path. It's real fast. Same crimping and tarping. That's pretty fast too. It's not, most every urban backyard's got a line trimmer and a lawnmower, and those are my two tools on the farm for. You can put the lawnmower up on top of the bed too and shred it to bits if you want to like flail mow. What I like about the blade on the line trimmer is it doesn't chop your crop into pieces. It leaves it long and standing to the side, super easy to pick up.
Yeah, I love those tips. So sorry, you want to cut you off before you're going into establishment.
Oh yeah, just so over the years, we've transitioned from farming with a small fork and a rake to John Martin gave me the Tilther and the single Jang when I first visited him. The Tilther was a game changer, as with the seeder. So moving forward, I used to be just raking the bed, scatter sowing, broadcasting the seed, and then raking that seed back in. Then that last rake is it's powerful work because you want in one pass to bury as many seeds as possible, rather than going multiple times and bringing more seed up. I'll come back to seeding rates. So once we started using the Tilther in 2016, I would cultivate the surface and then scatter sow my seeds over the bed, and then put this Tilther on a low setting and run back over the seeds to bury the seeds. So now I'm not having to do this manual work on the rake. That was working nice. So especially, yeah, so we just throw the seeds on top, bury them with the Tilther, irrigate, and 70% shade net on for germination. And this season, we've been putting in a lot. We've got half the garden in cover crop. The garden hasn't been like that since back in my John Evans days of seed production. Just with the economy down, we're having a massive project year while we've got a little breather, and we're looking at some large outlets. We've got this little window to expand the farm. And so cover crops have been our best friend because we just put half the garden to sleep. Most our production's all indoors in the greenhouses, and we're just doing the volumes that our sales demand, which is sitting at about half of recent years. And we've just been experimenting with the fibro Jang cover cropping. Now we have a newsletter that we put out every week. If you look at that, there's some stuff on YouTube and there's more information about what we've worked out with the fibro Jang. So for buckwheat, any of the larger seeds. Do you call it the felt, Diego? The black piece that sits in behind the seed roller on the Jang hopper?
It's on the little brass piece or the brush.
It's below it's the brass with the black fluffy stuff on it.
Yeah, I forget what the technical name for that is, but I know what you're talking about. So if anybody's a Jang seeder, on the underside of the roller, there's a piece of brass type metal with a felt on it.
Yeah. So for our cover cropping, we take that out. We lift the brush up 3/4 the size of the seed, and we're drilling. And so just before I jump on the Jang, we're drilling 400 grams of cover crop seed in summer and early fall on a 50-foot bed, or for us, it's 14 meters. It's pretty high density. It's much higher than the seed packet information. And as we get further into autumn or fall, we increase that seeding rate, and we go to crazy volumes. Like we start to get some cold nights, 500 grams. Days get a bit shorter, starting to get wetter, 600-700 grams. We just go off the charts. So we instead of scatter sowing the buckwheat and running over with the tilther, we set up the 5-row Jang. The black felt's out at the back, brushes up 3/4 of the seed size. And we did 5 rows, all 5 hoppers with the roller R24. It's one of the biggest holes that you can have, 24 holes on the roller. And we went up and down the bed. So down one side, back up the other. We now got 10 rows and we weighed the seed and we had 220 grams. So we're like, right, let's just go back over one more time. And we've got 440 grams, job done. And now that we've got that hopper calibrated, we just smash out a whole field block, like up and down with the tilther, back up and down with the Jang, sumi soakers on, 70% shade net over top, bang, just really fast, put to sleep. And with a fast ground cover crop like that, and at that higher density, there's nothing to do. There's no time. Weeds can't get established. They can't come up even on the paths, and you just forget about it until you're ready to terminate it.
Yeah, it's cool to hear you using the JP5 on that. We get a lot of questions about cover crops and the JP5. So if you're using the JP5 on your farm, absolutely possible to do cover crop seeding with it. You just have to match your roller or rollers with the type of seed. Gotten a lot of unique questions and comments from people who have it. Like we have some people who they put a different crop in each hopper with a corresponding roller. Instead of trying to mix all their crops in one roller or in one hopper, they might have peas in one, and then they got daikon in another, and mustard in another one, and then they roll down the bed that way and get optimal seeding rate of each of those crops based on it. Thought it was a really cool idea. Looking at a diagram here, that part that you're talking about is referred to the guide plate. Kind of looks like a 5 shape. So anybody who has a Jang, it's going to be in the hopper. Why remove that? What do you notice when you take that out?
It just most of the cover crop seeds are large or unusual shapes, like the buckwheat seed with the hull on is like a big triangle. It just gives you more space for the seeds to flow through. And again, brush height's key as always, but I've seen most people taking that black felt out as soon as they're drilling any seeds that are unusual shape, like beetroot, chard, spinach as well. So it just makes sense with the cover crop seed to hit that as well.
People who aren't familiar with the Jang, there's a brush at the exit side of the hopper. So the roller is spinning in one direction. It's carrying seed towards the exit. The brush is the last barrier of entry for that seed before it gets to the exit. The goal of the brush is if you have a small seed, you can set the brush low. It sweeps the roller, preventing too many seeds from exiting the seeder. By raising the brush, you're allowing more to get through. So bigger seeds, more brush.
Nice. So yeah, the Jang's been great. And, we're still peak summer, but we're looking at putting a ton of grains in this winter in new area that we're developing. So it's like, right, I want a same roller, R24. I want to just do a little trial with my grains to see how this is working, and same setup. Brush a little lower than buckwheat, and I just put in mixed oats, barley, wheat, and drilled a bed, and we've got 330 grams in one pass. No, and I thought, maybe that's a little light, but it came up beautiful. So we've kind of done that trial. We can repeat it in autumn when we put some area to sleep for winter, and then late autumn or fall, we can go twice over the bed, and from 320 grams, we can get 640, or we can probably get it down to 500 grams with 2 passes if we bring that brush down as well. I really can't emphasize enough brush height. And the speed with the Jang is most of the variation that you're going to have in the field. Can I just make a comment about the 5-row Jang doing mixed species and putting different seeds in different hoppers? That comment, I love it. We've been doing similar, and I've never mixed like let's say I'm doing 15 varieties. I've never mixed all my seed varieties together and just broadcasted them by hand or put them in the same hopper, just because they behave differently. It's very hard to get a control on the tiny seeds, like maybe clover. You kind of lose them, and the big seeds kind of steal the show. I just don't see the even results, and it's just more work. So, separate hoppers. We've been doing some intercropping where 5-row Jang hopper 1, 3, and 5 is set up for daikon, and hopper 2 and 4 is set up for coriander. Coriander is a beautiful cover crop, massive taproot. The other way, if we're doing a big area, let's say beds aren't prepared yet, we've just terminated the grass with tarp. We don't even have any paths, it's just a block. We'll just tilther the whole area, and then we can, let's say we do a big area at high density with lots of varieties. I'll put all my big seeds in the 5 hoppers and run over the top, and then come back, change out the rollers, and put all my small seed combos in, and just run back over the top of it again. I think you got a lot more control by treating your different seed sizes either in different hoppers or in different passes.
With regards to density, you talked a lot about refining that down. Is density of cover crops, does that have as much of an effect as it would on cash crops? So if you put seeded carrots extremely dense, you're going to end up with a bunch of small carrots. When it comes time for cover crop, you can think, well, hey, I'll just plant a whole bunch like you've talked about with microgreens and pea shoots, an extreme density. And a lot of times when I've done cover crops, it's cheap seed, and it's just seed the bejesus out of the bed. And if you get smaller plants, you get smaller plants, but there's a lot of roots in there. There's a lot of green. Do you think optimizing that density is critical, and people should pay attention, people like me, that it does affect performance?
Yeah, I mean, anything too widely spaced, you haven't got ground cover, your soil's naked. Public enemy number 1, be a soil. And so then you're weeding or terminating, trying to drill again. And anything too dense, they're going to be long, and they're going to be leggy and undersized. There's a sweet spot in the middle, but there's a lot more of a buffer, I think, with cover crops. And we've kind of been 400 grams to a 50-foot to 14-meter bed. I'm not sure how many ounces that is, but 400 grams to a 50-foot bed as our minimum. And that's during the growing season. And then as it gets colder, we'll 1.5x that. We'll get 500-600 grams. We're just looking for a living ground cover as quick as possible, so that there's no chance for bare soil or weeds, and we can just walk away from it and forget it.
Is upping the ratio density when it's colder, things are slower growing, so that means there's less, that canopy is slower to fill out, so we got to put more plants in there to fill it out quicker?
Yeah, germs probably down because soil biology's down a bit. Yeah. And I guess the other one too, without getting too much into this one, but great time to add your biologicals, either soil drenches or foliar feeding your cover crops as well. Get those plants really working and feeding the soil.
Any cover crops that you just will not use anymore? You talked about moving on from perennials because timing them with annuals has been tough, but if you just look at maybe some crops, they just haven't worked well in your context, they've been difficult to manage. Are there any that you're just like, I don't want to deal with these?
I mean, probably just the perennials. We did 15 species in new ground. And it was the clovers and the lucerne, the alfalfa, that were a bit more problematic. I guess no, I can't think of anything other than Some crops, if you leave them too long, it's more work, or you've got a more downtime because you've got so much biomass in the ground, like daikons. If they get massive, well, maybe they're easy to actually pull, but that's a ton of work. Or maybe you just smash them off above the ground and wait longer with the tarp. So I guess if it's problematic, tarp's your friend. You just play the waiting game. Terminating them with the blade on the line trimmer has been a game changer. Going back to the old school days, we had to wait till our cover crops had fully finished, and the plant bodies have a lot of carbon in them for them to release and pull out easy. We're never going back there. Pulling out cover crops manually is well, you can do a lot of other production in that time and energy. No, I think I love the multi-species mix. Right now, we're just punching out quick single crops because we're going. We do on average. We grow 4 crops in a bed in a season, and I'm looking at my cover crops. We just terminated the buckwheat at about 5 weeks, and we can go buckwheat back in or daikon. The daikons I'll be terminating young to be able to flip that ground and get my winter crops back in again. So I guess my suggestion here is it's what are your needs, when do you need that ground, and what for, that as your guide, rather than the classic how long questions, like how long do I put a tarp down, how long do you leave this in for. It's actually about what do you need, from what are the outcomes you need.
Yeah, what are the goals? What is your flexibility in time? Do you need to be able to pivot real quick? All right, then just throw a tarp over it, right? Use compost,
Sure.
those types of tools. Because that's really what you're doing in this is you're growing organic matter versus sourcing it from the outside. You're trading time for money. You're trading one type of labor, planting the cover crop versus spreading compost. You're maybe speeding up how quickly organic matter gets into that bed, because if you're using a low till system, you're going to get that anyway with your cash crops, but this is just moving that process along. The big question though is this. I would say there's many people extolling the virtues of these things, and it can feel great and sound great to do it and say you're doing it. Do you actually notice a difference when you grow a cash crop later on?
I would say, and this is just my style, if everything's fully decomposed and we're still adding compost again, absolutely we do. I mean, whenever we put homemade compost on a bed, we see a big jump in our production, the germination, color, vigor. We're just launching into biologicals this year. We'll come back to that in the future. We're pretty excited about that. I'm going to say it's all context, but on our compact mountain ash subsoil, we start cover cropping a new ground that we're going to prepare. We start cover cropping a year or two ahead, and we pretty much put in 2 cover crops, like a warm season terminated followed by a cool season, and on average we'll cover crop 2 years, so 4 crops before getting our broad fork and opening the ground up. And this is our situation, and I know other people have different results, but depending what part of the farm we're prepping, I'm going to say that it took out a quarter of the labor by cover cropping for 2 years when we came to broad fork and open up the bed. So it's something, but it wasn't like, dude, I cover crop this for 2 years and I can just put my arm in the soil. I'm going to sell my broad fork.
Yeah, you jump into the bed and go up to your neck, and hey, where'd Jodi go?
Yeah, it's cover crops, and I mean, this is a left field, but our most popular social media post ever, and we're open with IP, and we have super fun on the farm, but it's cover crops.
People get boners about this stuff, and like they love it. And I think the thing is, I think you just have to be realistic in your expectations. It's a tool in the toolkit. I don't think there's
Nice.
I don't think there's a way to construe it as a negative. Like there's no negative to it. But it's also not it's not going to 5x your farm. I think of it almost like a multivitamin that you take as a person.
Nice.
You're not going to take it and feel some sort of effect from that, but it's a bit of insurance to balance everything out and maybe cover up deficiencies that you might also have. It's a tool in the healthy diet toolkit. Now, sure, if you are extremely deficient in minerals, you're on pirate ship and your teeth are falling out and your gums are bleeding because you have scurvy, that vitamin is a miracle cure. And, there's probably soils where that would be the case. But I think it's a direction that's worth exploring. If you have the land, that's the big key. Because the struggle to make this work for people who do fantasize about cover crops and look through the I had one here, the green the cover crop seed catalog. They look through it like it's a nude magazine as a kid, like, ooh, look at all this stuff I'm gonna grow. You can't fall in love with being regenerative before you're a sustainable business. So
Yep.
first, your business has to work. And then I think it's like, how can you layer regenerative into it? So if you have enough land, make sure you have enough land to first keep your business going. And then add cover crops into that. That'd be my one worry. Cause I remember in my early permaculture days, they'd love to tell you about all the regenerative things that they're doing. And that's always coming at the expense of earning an income. And one season of amazing cover crops with a farm that turns into a pasture the next season. Well, actually, that's probably not too bad for nature, but not so great for you.
Yeah. So we're moving forward. If the economy comes back like strong like it's been, and we've finished our expansion, so we're putting one more bay on the greenhouse when we can afford it. So that's another 10 beds indoors, and we've got another 18 beds going in outdoors, and then we've got no more land. We might not have space to do cover crops again in 2 years' time, because every bed is going to be demanding as many successions of vegetables coming out of that bed unit for our sales. So right now, cover crops are best friend, because we're like, put it to sleep, project year. It's difficult to do high production and big expansion simultaneously during a recession, and that's where cover crops have come in for us.
Yeah, they filled that void nicely for you. I mean, because if you realistically wanted to do it, you'd have to have an extra field block to rotate through, right? Where you have, let's say, I don't know how many field blocks, I can't remember off the top of my head. Let's say you have 4 right now. You add a 5th block, and then you just constantly rotate through. But if the market was humming for you, you need all of the blocks in production. You can't tie up it in cover crop.
Yeah.
You have a land problem.
Yeah, and so we've all got resources that are relative to our proximity. Right now, our friend's farm, the organic raw milk farm, they've just cut new hay, and they've got some old hay that's been stored indoors from last year. Some of it's been spoilt by the rain. No glyphosate, no, it's all natural. So we've just got a huge amount of hay and silage off them, mixed with everything that's coming out the garden and the cover crops. And we're just making a crazy amount of compost for the greenhouses and the new ground where we're expanding. And so kind of, to bring it back to, you need more ground for cover crops. yes, totally agree with you. But I think if you read John Jevons' book and don't get too, don't become a disciple like I did, but you actually need double the ground and some again to grow enough cover crops to make enough compost to do your vegetable production. That's the challenge we'll face, is where does the carbon come from?
Yeah, that'd be an interesting
So,
future episode. I think this would actually be a fun one to do. Applying the John Jevons model to a production market farm. I mean, very quickly to sum it up, it's what John's philosophy was. You need to dedicate a portion of your land to growing carbon crops, which can then be used to create the fertility for the crops that aren't being returned to the soil, the stuff you eat. So you can't just grow everything on stuff you eat, or you won't have enough carbon to create compost from. So this is a closed loop system. In theory, you're even harvesting your own seed, where you're not
yep.
bringing in compost from the outside. And the regenerative community on one hand is like super regenerative on all the things we're doing. Look at all the compost we're using. On the flip side, it's like, look at all the compost you're bringing in. So you're highly dependent upon those outside waste streams. And I'm not saying that's bad at all, because you're using organic waste that would go somewhere else in a very productive way. But many farms are highly dependent on imported organic matter. In John's philosophy, very smartly, very idealistically, was, we're going to make it so you're not dependent upon any incoming organic matter.
Yeah, happy to talk about in the future. And I think that's the biggest challenge we face. Is we just need crazy amounts of biomass to make compost in house. And I guess that's my take, Diego, is that where possible, a market garden is a beautiful stacked enterprise on a grazing program, whether that's for us a dairy farm, sheep and beef, half an acre market garden stacked on a 300-acre dairy farm. It's nothing, and that's where that a lot of the resources are that will really drive the fertility for the market garden.